Welcome back to BLOCKTV, and today we are glad to be joined by Bruce Fenton, CEO at Atlantic Financial. Bruce, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now, Bruce, I want to start off here. It seems to be that the top topic of today, especially in America, is these protests going on across America right now against the lockdown measures. What side are you on in that argument?
Well, I'm a big fan of people taking responsibility for their own safety that they want, not mandatory lockdowns. And that's misinterpreted a lot. A lot of times if you say you're not in favor of mandatory lockdowns, people say, well, don't you understand that the virus is serious and these kind of things. It's not a matter of not thinking it's serious. It's a matter of whether mandatory lockdowns are the best policy. I don't think they are, because they have so many other drawbacks, not just to the economy, but human psyche and human rights and all of these other things. So I think that I would encourage people to stay home, especially as we're not, as we get more information about this, but I don't think that the government should mandate that. I think that has too many drawbacks.
Mm-hmm. And now you were one of the first people to really ring the alarm about the severity of COVID-19. But in a situation like this, where it's almost communal, it's almost, if one person who's sick goes out on his own and affects others, it's not just a situation of, hey, what you do in your own home is what you do in your own home. In a situation like this, where your actions could affect others, how do you reconcile that with the idea of, everyone should control their own risk for themselves?
Well, people might do stupid and evil things. That's just a fact of the way the world works. People will do stupid things and evil things. Sometimes people will intentionally infect somebody. Usually people will just do things that are stupid and irresponsible. And that is exactly why we can't trust certain people to have power to rule over us with violence. If people will do stupid or evil things, politicians are definitely not immune from that. Politicians will also do stupid or evil things. So there's no easy solution. Either you have personal responsibility, in which case some people might do some bad things and cause people to be infected, or you give power to governments and they put everybody in their home and have their thumb on your freedom. And that could cause a lot of problems if a politician is evil or stupid. So it's a trade-off. I personally think that the people that are going to do irresponsible things aren't going to be stopped too much by government, whereas giving personal responsibility to people does have some drawbacks, but overall I think is a better option than giving that power to governments.
Mm-hmm. And definitely similarly connected, especially with that's the government's at least viral response in terms of outside activity. But they responded financially by doing that 2.3 trillion. Sorry, 2.3. I can't even believe the number. That's how hard it is to say. $2.3 trillion bailout. Now there's talks of them trying to pass another $450 billion to help small businesses. It's clearly the first time it ran out very quickly, and there were even reports that about 25% of it went to just 2% of firms, including a massive publicly traded firms with executives that get all types of bonuses. Are they just digging themselves a bigger hole right now?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's another part of the bad reaction to this, the overzealous lockdowns, particularly in places, in California. Just yesterday, they were having a bulldozer put sand in a skate park. That's just ridiculous. Even if it was determined that people shouldn't be skating, that should be voluntary. And even in the extreme case where it needed to be mandatory, you don't need to fill it with sand. That's just ridiculous. And that's sort of what they're doing with the economy. They're kind of filling it with sand by printing useless money and doing, bad economic policies. All of this money that they're printing goes to cronies. It doesn't really help the situation. It actually penalizes savers. Somebody who had been very responsible as a company and saved a lot of money for a rainy day, they don't really get the bailouts. It's more for people with the debt. And it seems like the more irresponsible you were, like the airlines and some of the others, the more irresponsible you were, and the worse business model you had, like the banks in 2008, they're the ones getting the rewards, and that doesn't make sense. It's bad economics, and it's never a time for good. It's never a good time for bad economics, even in a crisis.
Mm-hmm. Let's speak economics. Right now, the stock market seemingly is stabilizing a little bit. It had another rally this week that's 2 in a row, and 3 out of the past 4 weeks is up. Is the stock market not a good or not a true representative of the status right now of the economy? What is going on there? Is the stock market stable?
I don't think the stock market is really understanding the magnitude of this crisis from an economic standpoint. You have higher unemployment spikes than we saw in the Great Depression. You have massive numbers of businesses going out of business. You have capital destruction that we've never seen in, certainly nearly a century or more. And so I don't think the market has really reflected that. Based on a price to earnings ratio in the US, the market is pretty much at its 35-year average. It's not even below average, even though we have by far the hardest economic hit that we've ever had. So I don't think the market has properly reflected it. Now, you can keep printing money so that nothing really means anything, and you have kind of this phony valuation where the market could sort of theoretically go up in dollar terms, but that doesn't really mean a lot if a loaf of bread costs $15. More likely what I think will happen is that the pendulum will swing the other way and markets will go back to their historical averages based on earnings. That's all I'm looking at. Historical average based on earnings would be significantly lower than what we see now. So I think that we're in for potentially a lot more pain in the markets as this shakes out and things reach a more reasonable valuations.
Mm-hmm. Now, the government is continuously printing money. What they can't print is gold. Is this now a good time to buy gold, and is gold performing as you would like it to?
Yeah, gold is very interesting. Gold has always been sort of one of the stores of value of last resort, the money of last resort. It has been a form of money for thousands of years. So it is.
Bruce, we lost you there.
Stable. It's tended to be. It's also independent of countries. Gold is worth something even if even if a fiat currency does poorly. So I think gold makes sense. Now, the interesting thing is you have this spread between real physical gold and paper gold. Paper gold that you see in most ETFs and hedge funds and family offices isn't real gold. It's just sort of a promise based on fractional reserves. So you actually have a price differentiation now where central banks are trying to get physical gold bars and individuals are trying to buy physical gold coins. And meanwhile, delivery and stores and mines are often shut down around the world. So you do have this differentiation in price. And I think you could see actually a crash in the physical gold markets. But I think the paper gold is something that's fairly stable and probably should be a part of everybody's portfolio at this point, if you can find a way to get it and store it safely, which is harder and harder as you get to larger amounts.
Mm-hmm. Now, gold, it's tough to get physically hands on and it's tough to store. How about Bitcoin? Can Bitcoin serve that purpose? If you're someone who doesn't believe right now in the US dollar, especially with the government printing tons of it, would you recommend then turning to Bitcoin?
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing. For many, Bitcoin is digital gold. And it does have a lot of advantages over gold, especially how easy it is to move. You can't really get to a gold mine and a gold store and all of these kind of things now, but you can get your own Bitcoin that you control, and it's not fractional reserve, and it's not paper, it's not based on just an ETF or something. You can get your own totally controlled Bitcoin pretty easily. So that does offer an advantage. I mean, Bitcoin is still really speculative and really risky and sort of new, especially compared to gold. I mean, it's a decade or so, but the world is in such a weird situation now, and you have these strange occurrences with fiat and everything else. It actually may make sense to buy Bitcoin now, as crazy as that is. I think that it should be a part of a lot more portfolios than it is, and a lot of investors, particularly risk-oriented investors who can afford that kind of risk, Bitcoin could be a good time to buy right now.
Mm-hmm. Now, oftentimes, Bitcoin is compared to digital gold, but one of the biggest differentiators between the two of them is that gold is mined physically, and there's an amount. We don't know the exact amount that's available in the earth, and it comes out as the rate they mine it happens to be. Now, with Bitcoin, because it is an algorithm, we know exactly the amount that is total to be mined, and we know the exact rate that it is to be mined. Now, the Bitcoin halving is coming up very soon in a week or two, and at that point, the mining reward, the amount of mined is going to be cut in half. How does that affect and how does that change how someone in this situation who's saying, hey, I want to keep my money safe, and right now the dollar is not safe money?
Yeah, so the halving means that the block reward goes down by half. So every 10 minutes, there's going to be half as many Bitcoins being created sometime, coming up in a matter of weeks, really. And so that means there's half as many Bitcoins in the new supply. It's supply and demand. If the demand stays the same as what we have now, that would positively affect the price. It's hard to judge on Bitcoin. I think that will be a positive thing for Bitcoin, but again, it's very, very risky and speculative. And it's kind of like everything in the world is speculative, and everything is bad, including Bitcoin, but maybe the other options are worse, So I'm cautious to say, run out and buy it, because it is risky. I mean, but I think fiat is risky either. I'm concerned about being in the US dollar. I'd be concerned about being in the euro or any currency right now. It's all quite concerning, but yeah, this halving, I think overall will be a net positive to Bitcoin. And the key is can this narrative keep up? Is Bitcoin a store of value? If Bitcoin's performance does well during this crisis, it wouldn't take much for us to go back above 10,000. And, that could set up a rally where you go to new highs. If Bitcoin goes anything like that in this economic environment where people see everything down and Bitcoin is flat or up, then that alone can sort of change the narrative. It can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and then people start to see that as real money, and that could be very, very positive.
Mm-hmm. At that point, I believe the sky would be the limit. Now, you recently ran a poll on your Twitter trying to get a feel for for what people are going through and what are their thoughts on a number of topics. I want to run through those results with you and kind of tell me, what surprised you most about the poll results.
Sure.
So you have right there the first time, of course, multi-part poll threads are fun. Of course, it's fun. But second is your first real question. How much do you trust the U.S. government to tell the truth? And the vast majority said not at all. Is that reflective of America as a whole, or is that reflective of your Twitter followers?
My Twitter following is probably a little bit different. I think that most people are distrusting of our own government now. It was only basically one person, I think, or two people on that poll who said that they completely trust the government. And it would be interesting to run this in a little while. I haven't asked this question before. Some of them I have asked in the past. But it would be interesting to see how that changes. I think that people are trusting the government less, particularly some of the younger generation. And it looks like whether you're on the right or the left in America, I think that everybody would say that there's some things the government could improve on.
Mm-hmm. And do you see that this global event and this once in a lifetime almost pandemic will have major political ramifications once it's over?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it will change how people look at institutions that they used to trust, how they look at politicians, how they look at government. And I think that will I think that everything will change. I have an economic report that I'm working on. We can discuss next time I'm on here, but that's mainly one of the big themes, which is how our world will change very profoundly. And I think it will affect everything from governments to all of the institutions that we used to trust and the way that our very world worked.
Mm-hmm. And right now what we're seeing is you asked how much do you trust the media to tell the truth? And once again, a vast majority saying not at all. It's kind of crazy right now. We live in the information age, and yet people are seemingly not trusting what they're seeing. I mean, is there a solution to this, and what do you see coming out of this?
Yeah, I think it's partly the economics of the business. Because of the internet was a new way for news to compete. It brought the barriers to entry down quite a bit, so anybody can become sort of a broadcaster and create a blog and these kind of things. I have an article that I framed when I was early in my career. When you were in something like Forbes, 20 years ago, you'd take the cover and you'd hang it on your wall and you'd frame your articles. I was just in a couple minor articles, and you'd frame them, and people would even put them in wood casings. And, that was a thing 20, 30 years ago. And now it's not, because, being on a television program or in a media is much more common now. So there's more competition, and as a result of that, some media has become more sensational to try and capture those clicks. It's all about the eyeballs and all about the clicks. And unfortunately, as a result of that, quality went down in some cases. So you do have some media that, particularly some of the big news publications, the newspapers that in the United States that for 100 years were sort of, the gold standard of information. They have big overheads, and they're trying to fight with scrappy competitors who have tiny staffs and much more lean budgets. So they unfortunately they're just as sensational as anybody else, sometimes worse. So I think that this whole situation is probably a pin that pops the media bubble as we know it, and you're going to have a big shifting where some of these organizations that have been around for a long time aren't going to be as trusted.
Okay, well, next up, the next question you had is you asked your readers if they own Bitcoin. 70% say they own Bitcoin. Now, I want you to know that is a very high, very high percentage, much higher than the average person in the world. What do you feel? Does that make you happy that you have such a strong follower base that does own Bitcoin? And what does that say about your followers?
It's no surprise. I think that I had a lot of people that were predisposed to Bitcoin before I got into Bitcoin, who were original followers, but most of my followers have grown since I've been active in Bitcoin, and it's a topic I talk about a lot, so it doesn't surprise me a bit. I think I hope that more people who are not Bitcoiners will follow me and other people who talk about it and learn about it, because it is interesting. The whole technology around it and everything in the community and ecosystem is fascinating. So, hopefully we'll have more people on it.
Yeah, well, I hope so too, and hopefully, one day, like you said, you used to frame your photo of Forbes. I hope you're framing your photos of BLOCKTV. I know
For sure.
I am. Now, last question, you did ask, do you own other cryptocurrencies, tokens, or digital assets? And 61% said yes. Also, slightly above average. Do you own multiple cryptocurrencies? Are you a Bitcoin maximalist, as they say?
I'm a Bitcoin maximalist in the sense that I think it's the best digital currency and the best form of digital money. I do believe in some of the other technologies, and I think it's worth experimenting. And I view kind of the whole space, even Bitcoin, as experimentation. So I do own a few. I tend to lean towards projects that are open source, that follow sort of the best practice models of Bitcoin, open source, fair launch, preferably no pre-mine. Although I've owned Ethereum. I owned Ethereum in the early days, and I own Ethereum now. That did have a pre-mine, and it did have a fundraise. But most of the things that I like are, Grin, Ravencoin, Litecoin, other projects that had that had pretty much similar issuance mechanism to Bitcoin. And I think that a fundraise coin can be fine. But it's just harder if you're trying to be truly decentralized. If you're doing a fundraise, I'd rather see something go and become a security and give away equity and just do it slightly different. You don't see a lot of securities tokens doing that yet. But all of these things are kind of experimental. I think it's worth following. Again, very cautious. If somebody's investing, then you could certainly lose everything you invest with these. So you should be really careful.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know your opinions on the government telling you what to do. So are you a fan of decentralized governance like DAOs and other kind of decentralized organizations like that? Are you a fan of that, or is you simply every person for his own?
I think I think decentralization is a great trend in general for the overall economy and the world. And I think it can help us a lot with governance and getting rid of some of these or reducing the power of some of these huge institutions that have a lot of power. Spreading the power among the people is generally a good idea. Sometimes it's effective to have a leader. Like if you have a CEO, if you're opening a new restaurant to replace all these restaurants that are going out of business, it does make sense to have a head chef and somebody with a vision. You don't want to decentralize everything. There's been some experimentation with decentralized organizations and governance, where it does get kind of cumbersome. Sometimes you do need a visionary, a person making a decision to say, this is what we're going to do, this is what it is, this is our vision, let's execute it. And that's kind of your classic tech company or something like that. So there's a place for decentralization for sure, and overall it's a great thing for governance and business and the way that things can work, but it does need to be balanced. Not everything should be decentralized or can benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. And last question before I let you go. It's been a week since we last spoke. There's been a bunch of developments in the world. How close are we to seeing the end to this pandemic?
We are probably not really close to seeing the end of the pandemic. And we're definitely not close to seeing the end of the crisis, because what the crisis now is not just the health crisis. It's a global economic crisis that includes real estate, hospitality, airlines, jobs. There's all kinds of secondary and nth order effects that come out of this that are really, really significant. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the health piece of it is going to be solved anytime soon. For it to be solved, you'd have to have no cases and have it totally contained. We don't have that situation yet. We have, it's still growing in many places, and the quarantines and lockdowns are just totally unsustainable. So that's not really a solution. So we're unfortunately in kind of a morass here, and it's a tough situation. But hopefully we'll have some better results with the treatments of the virus as well as containment. So I think that overall we have this bigger crisis that's more than just the health crisis, and unfortunately I think that will go on for some time. But hopefully we'll see a light at the end of the tunnel with some of these treatments and engaging in a more nuanced form of social distancing or physical distancing, where you can still work but you maintain distance and caution. And hopefully a combination of these things will make this a little bit more manageable and get the economy working again.
Well, let's hope that is over as soon as possible. Thank you, Bruce, for taking the time and being with us. And for all our viewers at home, if you want more on blockchain, crypto, and tech news, make sure to check us out at blocktv.com.
Watch us on Amazon Fire TV and Roku.